The day my father had his stroke, my brother was already on the phone with a lawyer. I didn't find out until 3 weeks later. At the time, I was sitting in the ICU waiting room at Sunnybrook, still wearing the scrubs I'd had on since my morning shift, eating a granola bar I'd found at the bottom of my bag, because I couldn't bring myself to leave the building long enough to get real food. My sister-in-law walked past me twice without making eye contact. I thought she was just stressed. I was wrong about that. My father is a retired civil engineer from Sudbury. He built his career slowly, the way people from Northern Ontario tend to do, methodically, without fanfare, with a stubbornness that looked like patience from the outside. He designed infrastructure for mining operations for 30 years, saved carefully, bought the house in the annex when Toronto was still affordable, and invested whatever was left. By the time I was in my 20s, he had accumulated something real, not flashy, not a dynasty, but real. My older brother had never once acknowledged that. He just assumed it would come to him. My father never said outright that he planned to leave everything to me. He didn't need to. I was the one who drove him to his cardiologist appointments every 3 months. I was the one who knew the names of all his medications, the one who'd quietly arranged for a meal delivery service. After I noticed his fridge was empty 2 weeks in a row, the one who sat with him on Sunday evenings and watched whatever documentary series he was into that month. My brother called on his birthday and at Christmas. Sometimes he texted in between. That was the extent of it. His wife, I'll just call her my sister-in-law because that's what she was, legally, had the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. She sold real estate in Oakville and was very good at it, which meant she spent most of her time calculating the value of things and deciding how much of herself to invest in each transaction. I had understood from the beginning of their relationship that I was not a high-value transaction. When my father's stroke hit, it happened on a Tuesday afternoon in March. He was making tea. A neighbor found him and called 911. My brother got the call from the hospital because he was listed as next of kin. I found out 40 minutes later when my brother finally texted me. Not called, texted. I drove to Sunnybrook in rush-hour traffic from my shift at the clinic where I worked as a nurse practitioner. I sat in that waiting room for 6 hours. My brother arrived 90 minutes after I did, my sister-in-law at his side, both of them in business casual clothes like they'd just come from a showing. He hugged me briefly. She gave me a look I couldn't read. My father survived. He was unconscious for 4 days. When he woke up, he was confused and exhausted and couldn't speak properly yet. Aphasia, the neurologist explained, common after this type of stroke, likely temporary with therapy. He could understand us. He just couldn't form the words fast enough to respond. That was when my brother made his move. He came to me in the hallway outside my father's room on the 5th day, while Dad was sleeping. He had a folder. He said he'd spoken with a lawyer, an estate lawyer, and that given Dad's condition, someone needed to have power of attorney immediately, for his finances and for his personal care. He said he'd already had the documents drafted. He said he needed me to witness his signature. I looked at the folder. I looked at my brother. I asked him when he'd had these drawn up. He said a few days ago. I said, a few days ago, meaning before Dad woke up, meaning when we didn't know what his recovery would look like or whether he'd have full cognitive capacity. He said someone had to be practical. I said I wasn't going to sign anything that night. I said we should wait until Dad could communicate more clearly, until we could speak with the hospital's social worker, until we had a clearer picture. He got very quiet in the way that he does when he's angry, and trying not to show it. He said he was the eldest. He said he was better positioned to manage these things. He said, and I remember this precisely, that I was a nurse, not a financial professional, and that I should let the people who understood these things handle it. I went home that night and I did not sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in front of me, and I thought about a conversation I'd had with my father 2 years earlier. We'd been sitting in his backyard on a Saturday afternoon in July, the kind of afternoon that makes Toronto feel like it's briefly forgiven you for everything. He'd been quiet for a while, the way he gets when something is working its way to the surface. Then he said, I've been thinking about getting my affairs in order. He said he had a lawyer he trusted, a woman named Patricia who'd done his wills after my mother left, years ago, and that he'd recently updated everything. He said he wanted me to know that the house, the investments, and the cottage up near Perry Sound were all accounted for in the document, and that his wishes were clear. He said he'd told Patricia that I was the person to call if anything ever happened to him. He slid a card across the patio table, Patricia's card. the name of her firm, her direct line. I had kept that card in the small zipper pocket inside my wallet for 2 years. The next morning, I called Patricia's office at 8:47 a.m. Her assistant picked up. I said my name. I said my father had had a stroke and was in hospital, and that I believed his son, my brother, was attempting to establish power of attorney without my father's full informed consent. I said I understood my father had been in contact with Patricia and that she was aware of his wishes. There was a pause. The assistant said, "Please hold." Patricia herself came on the line 4 minutes later. She knew exactly who I was. She said my father had flagged this as a possibility, not specifically, not with names, but he had told her that there might be pressure from other family members and that he wanted certain protections in place. She said the updated will and the power of attorney documents were already executed, already signed, already notarized, already filed, months before the stroke. My name was on them, not my brother's. I asked her what I should do about the documents my brother was circulating. She said, "Leave that to me." Patricia contacted the hospital's legal department that afternoon. She sent a registered letter to my brother's lawyer. She made clear, in the precise and unhurried way of someone who has been doing this for 25 years and is not impressed by anyone, that any attempt to execute an unauthorized power of attorney over a patient whose legal documents were already in place would expose my brother to significant legal liability. She used the phrase potential elder financial abuse in that letter. I know because she sent me a copy. My brother called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was calm on the surface and furious underneath, the way all his messages are. He said I was being difficult. He said he was just trying to protect Dad. He said he hoped I was happy. I didn't call back. I texted him the name of Patricia's firm and said that all further communication should go through her. My sister-in-law showed up at the hospital the next day while I was visiting my father. She came into the room while I was there, sat down across from me, and smiled the way she smiles at clients when a deal is about to go sideways. She said she wanted to clear the air. She said this whole thing had gotten out of hand. She said she hoped I understood that my brother had only been trying to do what was right for the family. My father was watching us from the bed. He couldn't speak clearly yet, but his eyes were sharp. I'd learned in those 2 weeks to read them. I looked at my sister-in-law and I said that my father's wishes were legally documented and that I had no interest in relitigating them. I said if she or my brother had concerns, they were welcome to direct them to his estate lawyer. She looked at my father. Something passed across her face, not guilt exactly, more like recalculation. She stood up. She said she'd be in touch. She wasn't. Over the following 6 weeks, while my father went through speech therapy 3 times a week and slowly, steadily reclaimed his words, the way he described it was like fishing for them in dark water. He said one afternoon, which made me laugh and cry at the same time, my brother made a number of strategic moves that I watched with a growing sense of recognition. He contacted my father's bank directly and attempted to have himself added to the accounts as a signatory, citing his father's incapacity. The bank flagged it. Patricia's office had already sent documentation. The request was declined. He called one of my father's oldest friends, a man who'd known our family for decades, and apparently told him that I was taking advantage of Dad's condition and refusing to let the family be involved in his care. This friend called my father directly, once Dad's speech had improved enough for phone calls. My father told him in his still slow but unmistakable way that was not true. That conversation didn't go well for my brother. In week 5, my brother hired a second lawyer, a litigator this time, not an estate lawyer, and sent a formal letter to Patricia's office, suggesting that my father's will should be contested on the grounds that he'd lacked capacity since the updated version. This was demonstrably false. The updated will had been signed 14 months before the stroke. My father had been assessed by his family doctor at his annual checkup 2 months after signing. There was no question of capacity. Patricia responded with documentation. 14 months of documentation. That letter did not get a response. I kept showing up. That was the whole of my strategy, if you can call it that. I showed up at the hospital for therapy sessions. I showed up at his apartment when he came home to make sure it was set up properly for his mobility aids. I showed up on Sunday evenings with food. I answered the phone at 2 in the morning when he was confused and frightened and needed a voice he recognized. I had been showing up for years and I just kept doing it. My father's speech recovered almost completely over 4 months. He has a slight delay now, a pause before certain words, but you'd only notice if you were listening for it. On a Tuesday evening in early August, we were sitting on his back porch. He was in the reclining chair his occupational therapist had recommended. I was on the old wooden bench he'd had since before I was born, and he said, "I know what your brother tried to do." I didn't ask how he knew, he just does. He said, "I want you to know that Patricia has everything in order." He said, "I want you to know that I am not confused about what I want." I didn't say anything, I just put my hand over his. He said, "I chose you because you showed up, not because of the documents. Not because of the legal filings or the registered letters, or the phone call I made at 8:47 in the morning. Because I showed up." That's what he said. My brother has not spoken to me since the second lawyer's letter went unanswered. I don't know if he ever will. Some part of me is still sad about that. We grew up in the same house, we have the same laugh. There was a time when he was the person I called when something good happened. I don't think he became greedy all at once. I think it happened slowly, in the small decisions he made over years about who was worth his time and what people were actually worth to him. By the end, I was just an obstacle between him and something he felt he was owed. My sister-in-law sends me a card at Christmas. I have not opened any of them. My father has a physiotherapy appointment on Thursday. I'll pick him up at 9. After, we'll probably go to the diner on Bloor that he likes, the one with the booths by the window, and he'll have the eggs Benny he always has and complain that they've made the portions smaller again, which they haven't. On the drive home, he'll fall asleep in the passenger seat because the appointment tires him out. I'll park in front of his building and wait until he wakes up. That's what I'll do. Same as always. Not because I'm named in a document, though I am. Not because a lawyer made a phone call, though she did. Because he's my dad. And this is just what it looks like when you actually show up.